then we drive to the forest.
My dad tried that once.
I love doing that. Give me a gavel and I'm happy. No, just kidding. I call to order the September 2022 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to those who are joining us by way of the live stream and those attending in our boardroom by way of Zoom. I'm Doug Hipsch. I serve as Vice Chair of the committee. Chair Janie Mariron is not able to be with us this afternoon, so I will be filling in as chair today. First of all, I'd like to welcome our student representatives for today, Hal Johnson from the Morris campus. Oh, hi, Hal. And Nicholas Wallenhorst from the Twin Cities campus. So our first item is the committee's 2022-2023 work plan. Chair Mariron and I worked with Senior Vice President France to create the work plan, and we welcome any comments from the committee. The work plan includes topics across the various areas of our committee portfolio, from finance to operations and human resources. Two items I'll highlight. First, you will see that the work plan includes our standard practice of providing multiple points of discussion and input into the annual operating budget process before it comes for review this year in June. And in December, the committee will learn more about the types of data and metrics used to set comparisons for those positions requiring board approval and provide feedback on a template that will be used to communicate key compensation information to the board when we are asked to act on employment agreements. With that, Senior Vice President Franz, are there items that you would like to highlight?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hipsch. Yes, I would like to make a few additional items for comment for the committee to look forward to this year. Assuming that the strategic property plan resolution is approved later in this meeting, we plan to bring to the committee updates from the new strategic property planning work group in December and June of this fiscal year, or as needed throughout the year. In October, the committee will take part in a conversation focused on the key cost drivers of the university's system-wide information technologies, highlighting how this critical infrastructure impacts the university's budget and operations. The committee will also highlight the ongoing work to implement Impact 2025, the system-wide strategic plan. This includes discussions focused on the capital financing program in December, peak implementation in February, and a sustainability update in May. The committee will also engage with topics focused on human resources, including today's overview of the 2021 Employee Engagement Survey and the annual Workforce and Human Resources Strategy Report in May. Finally, I'll note one change from past years. Typically, the board approves both the 6-year capital plan and the state capital request in October. As the docket notes, this year we are separating those two items. I'll speak more about these issues later today when we discuss the 6-year plan. Thank you, Vice Chair Hipsch.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Franz. Is there any discussion? I don't see any discussion, so we'll move on to the next item of business. Our second item is a review of the President's recommended fiscal year 2024-2025 biannual budget request. President Gable, Senior Vice President Franz, Vice President Tonneson are here to present the recommendation. President Gable, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. So earlier this year, during the 2022 legislative session, the university proposed a series of high-priority funding opportunities. Unfortunately, as we know, the session adjourned in May without the legislature passing a supplemental higher education bill or a capital investment bill, and there has not subsequently been a special session to further discuss the proposals. So following that experience, we proposed to submit to the state for consideration two requests. One is an incremental increase of $45 million to our general fund appropriation in each of the next 2 years for critical core mission support, and the other is for an incremental $35 million recurring starting in fiscal year 24 for the three highest non-capital priorities carried over from the last session: the Promise Program, the Greater Minnesota Scholarship, and our public safety enhancements, all of which focus on addressing the financial and safety concerns of our university community, many of our university students and families, and for which state funding is essential in order to move forward. These priorities also reflect our commitments through Impact 2025 and to the future. They show how we've faced challenges and made sound and productive adjustments. They show how we've stayed committed to our mission while looking ahead, and they've really shown the spirit of our institution with its over 170 years of legacy. So members of the committee, we very much look forward to continuing to work with state lawmakers and partners to advance these priorities in the weeks and months ahead. And at this time, Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to turn it over to Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Tonneson for the deeper dive.
That's good. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam President. This summer, we engaged in a process to seek broad input for consideration of the university's biennial budget request. I want to thank all those who participated in that discussion and your helpful ideas. We wanted to make sure that the president and now this board had the benefit of voices from around the university system as we consider submitting this important budget request to the legislature in 2023. And we will continue seeking input from faculty and students this fall, beginning next Monday with the Senate Committee on Finance and Planning. Today, we are prepared for your consideration on behalf of the President, the university's biennial budget request. With your permission, Vice Chair Hibbs, Vice President Tonneson will begin the presentation.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Hibbs, and good afternoon, everybody. Our purpose today is to present the President's proposed biennial budget request to the state of Minnesota for the 24-25 biennium. And you can think about this presentation as having really three sections, three sets of information we want to share with you. The first section will be about background on the biennial budget process itself, talking about what it is, how it fits in with our budget process, the timing, and so forth. The second portion of the presentation will be some slides that we want to share with you about the history of state support to the university. And then finally, we'll end with more detailed information about the specific proposals we are putting on the table to increase our base appropriation. So with that, to start the summary of the process itself, each biennial cycle is based on a 2-year budget adopted by the state. So this coming legislative session, 2023, they will be working to set the 24-25 state budgets. Within that biennium, we will bring to you for review and action 2 separate annual university operating budgets. So the boxes in gray that you see on this chart. Next June, we will bring for your review and action the FY24 recommended budget, and then a year later, in the spring of 2024, we will bring the FY25 budget. The biennial budget process itself focuses, not surprisingly, on the state funds to the university. That's about 17% of our total revenues right now. The annual budgets for 24 and 25 are all funds budgets. So 100% of our revenues and the spending associated with them. As we look to develop our request to the state, we look to principles and strategies that have served us well in the past and that are still relevant for today. So as we go through the process, and come up with the items that we want to propose. These 5 or 6 strategies that you see listed here are important to us to think about. We want the request to emphasize what is important to the university at this point in our history. We want to express what we really need to maintain our excellence and not just to present what might sell well. We believe in presenting our needs. We're presenting a very compelling case for state support. We want to recognize the unique partnership opportunities we have to work with the state to support our students and their families by providing resources necessary to ensure the highest quality services and to do what we can to hold down costs and provide financial support to those with the highest need. We want to present a request that isn't blind to the political realities before us or to the fiscal realities of the state budget, be they challenging like they were at the beginning of the pandemic, or as I would term it today, sufficient, as the most recent state forecast has indicated. And finally, we want to state our case in ways that are straightforward and express strong rationale for our proposals. We believe the recommendations we're bringing forward today align with each of these strategies. So how do we get to this point in the process, and where do we go from here? This summer, so the last 8 weeks or so, we started to model different scenarios for what our budgets could look like in FY24 and FY25. That's what the black box on this chart is attempting to represent. Our internal processes for estimating cost increases and growth in other revenues under different assumptions. Nothing is set right now for the next 2 years, but this process allows us to narrow down the major variables to a set of ranges that are reasonable and provide a good basis on which to start our planning. For example, we look at what different inflation assumptions will mean for our basic costs and work within those to arrive at what we feel is likely and can lead to responsible and successful budget plans. The state appropriation is just one of the variables that we work with. So what we're bringing to you today in terms of a proposed request to the state is a direct result of modeling costs and revenues and determining the best general fit for each. We'll talk more about that when we talk about how we got to the numbers that we are proposing to request from the state in a few slides. But moving from today, the biennial budget request that you ultimately approve in October will be submitted to the state in mid-October per their deadlines. At that point, Minnesota Management and Budget and the Governor's Office will work through all of their issues to develop, and they'll look at our request and develop the governor's recommended budget that will be submitted to the legislature, with or without our proposals, hopefully with. Then what happens is our full request plus the governor's reaction to it is submitted to the legislature, and we work with the state folks explaining our proposals again, this time to individual legislators and to committee members. And it works through their process, and with any luck, we will have a higher education bill signed by the end of session that includes our appropriations. That will not happen until the very end of May. Simultaneous with that process, we are working on building our annual budget, as I mentioned, all funds budget with you for FY24. That's the gold bar here. So we have started that process already. We're about ready to send budget instructions to our support units this fall. We'll meet with them, talk about their challenges and priorities, guided by some of the modeling we've done in the black box. But then we get to after the first of the year, we'll meet with our academic units, do the same thing, and at the end of the academic year, really, once we know our appropriation, we pull it all together and bring to you the president's recommended budget. We will meet with you along the way. It's on your agenda on various meetings. Probably get tired of me sitting here talking about the budget, but it's there so that we can walk through this process together and talk about the variables for next year. The second year of the biennium is a little bit more straightforward because we know our appropriation. The state does it 2 years at a time. So for the second year, FY25, we will incorporate our appropriation in our planning right at the beginning. We will tweak our assumptions that are in that black box today and arrive at go through the same process and arrive at a new recommended budget for FY25 in the spring of 2024. So before we talk about some of the history of state support, I want to just briefly ground you in some of the numbers that are before us right now as we think about the next biennium. What you see here are the appropriations as they exist in law today for the current biennium. The large discretionary operations and maintenance appropriation, O&M, is above the blue line. You can see that's about $622 million this year. Then between the blue lines, we have the state specials. These are appropriations that the law directs us to allocate to specific units of the university and functions within the university. So the total general fund, funded primarily by income tax and sales tax at the state, is $690.5 million for the current year. You see that about halfway down. The state does incremental budgeting, which means they develop a base. And that base appropriation is the starting point for discussions up or down for the next year. It would remain that level unless the state takes action to actually, in law, increase or decrease our appropriation. That number is the $690.5 million per year, less the non-recurring items that are in this year's appropriation. They actually identified some of our appropriation as non-recurring, so we have to pull that out. So the actual base annual appropriation general fund is $689,256,000 per year. You take that times 2 for the biennium, that's $1.4 almost billion for the next biennium. Now we also get 2 base appropriations outside of the state's general fund. We get $2,157,000 per year from the Healthcare Access Fund, that's for primary care initiatives in the medical school, and we get $22,250,000 from the cigarette tax proceeds that has to go to our health science units. Those dollars are for general operations in those units, but those are the base amounts that will continue unless they take action to change them in law. They have actually been at this level, I looked it up, since 2004 and 2007. So they've been very flat for a long time and have obviously lost some buying power, which takes me to the next section, which is the history of state support of the university. And I'll turn it over to Senior Vice President Franz for these couple slides.
Thank you, Vice President Tonneson. When you compare Minnesota to other states, Minnesota's per capita support of higher education in total ranks about 19 out of 50 states today. In this category, you want the low number, so you'd like to be number one in this particular competition. We're not. We're number 19 right now. But in the 1990s, Minnesota was in the top 10 in the country, and as high as number 5 in 1990. Minnesota dropped to number 25 in 2012, as you can see, and then it's worked its way back up to number 19 in 2019, which has remained where we've remained since. Now, this chart shows you what's happened in the state of Minnesota with respect to the appropriation since 1990. You can see that as a percent of the state's general fund spending, the support for higher education has gone down. Now, we use the idea of general fund because that is the fund that the legislature has the discretion, and that's how they form the basis of their biennial budget. This chart shows one view of that change. Now, in 1990, you can see that the state appropriated about 14.5% of the general fund dollars to higher education, and within that, 6.8% went to the University of Minnesota. In 2023, the state appropriated a total of 6.5% of general fund dollars to higher education, and just 2.5% went to the University of Minnesota. Now, the actual dollar amounts vary in each one of these years, but this is one way to view the change in state priorities over this time frame. Now, as a percent of general fund dollars appropriated to the university has decreased over time, the percent appropriated to other areas has increased, obviously, in health and human services, corrections, E-12 education, local government, they all have increased. This reflects a change in priorities for scarce state resources. If you look at the next slide, the impact on those state dollars also has changed dramatically over this time frame. This chart shows the operating appropriation to the university in actual dollars, the gold line, and the adjusted for inflation, the maroon line shows you if that had been adjusted for inflation. Because of recent increases in inflation, the gap, as you can see on the top right, the gap between the actual appropriation and what the fiscal 28 appropriation would be today, adjusted for inflation, is almost $250 million per year. That represents a significant loss in buying power for the university. Even going back a couple of years to before the recent inflation hikes, take fiscal year 2021, the gap was $184 million. In fiscal 16, the gap was $110 million. And even all the way back to fiscal 2010, the first year gap that existed in this chart, the difference was $58 million. These differences represent significant changes and challenges to balancing our budget. Now, we understand that difficult choices must be made at the state level, but we think it's important to be clear that the state does play a major role in impacting the university's budget and our ability to carry out our mission for the people of Minnesota and the students, faculty, and staff at the University of Minnesota. You know, as this appropriation and the buying power has trended down over time, the actual dollar amounts have also dropped. But one of the things that we've had to do in the meantime is make up that large revenue gap. Now, we do that in a number of different ways. Number one, we've done it with internal spending reductions. Number two, we've had a growth in research funds. And number three, we've had some tuition growth as well. These are all needed to keep our operations functioning at the level that we want to see the University of Minnesota strive to hit. Now, despite these state funding reductions, we've made some significant improvements to the university because we're committed to driving to our mission. For example, our total research awards topped $1 billion in the last 2 years. That's almost a 50% increase from 2008 when it was $675 million. In 2022, we produced a record 22 startups and 241 patents. We decreased our greenhouse gas emissions by 47% since 2008, and we're still making progress on many other sustainability goals. Our four-year graduation rate for entering freshmen for all campuses increased from 51.5% in 2008 to 66.8% in 2017. Now, we've seen some significant increases in applications for the fall 2022 class from Indigenous students, up 25% over year, of Black students up 24%, and Hispanic students up 22%. Now, there will be more Indigenous and Black students in this year's freshman class than any on record. The university was ranked 44th, as many of you have heard, in the World Overall 2022 Shanghai ranking. This report, internationally known for ranking the top 1,000 research universities worldwide, also identified 10 University of Minnesota subject areas in the top 25 worldwide. So these achievements are in spite of the challenges that we've seen with reduced state funding and the loss of buying power in the dollars that we have received. We've also been able to keep the average annual increase in the resident undergraduate tuition rate less than 3% for each campus since 2008. At the same time, we've seen student debt decrease overall. The average student debt for those who borrowed decreased from $30,000 in 2012 to around $28,000 in 2021. And the percent of students who do not borrow at all to finance their education grew from 34% in 2012 to 42% in 2021. We also now have the lowest price among Minnesota four-year institutions for Minnesota students entering in 2019 for families earning $110,000 or less. These achievements are critical to our mission, and what we require to meet our goals must be included in our budget to drive to our mission. While we operate with efficiency and a culture of continuous improvement, we also make hard choices. We cut items from our budgets every year, and we have reduced headcount by over 1,000 since 2020. But I can tell you this balancing act becomes more difficult every year. Today, we are proposing to ask the state to partner with us on addressing the financial needs to maintain the excellence we have built and to expand our support for students and families. I'll let Vice President Tonneson walk through the details of our proposal. Vice President?
Thank you. So to put specifics on how the state can help, we've summarized what we are proposing to request on this slide. First, we're proposing to ask the state for an incremental new $45 million in FY24 and again above that in FY25 so that our annual base appropriation will be $90 million higher in FY25 than it is today. This is a 6.5% and 6.1% annual increase. Second, we propose asking the state for the three priorities carried over from last year's supplemental operating budget request, as the President mentioned. 3 items that we cannot move forward with in the near future without additional state funding. These would all be requests for recurring increases to our base funding starting in FY24. A $10 million increase for the Promise program, $20 million for a new Greater Minnesota Scholarship, and $5 million for public safety enhancements throughout the system. In total, the FY24 incremental request is $80 million with an additional $45 million requested for FY25. And you can see the annual percentage increases in the appropriation there on the bottom line. Now, that is the way we look at the numbers inside from a university budgeting perspective, but often the state looks at our request in biennial rather than annual terms. So we wanted to show you what that looks like as well. Biennial math compares the upcoming biennium, so the next 2 years, to the current biennium, the current 2 years. So that means any recurring growth starting in year 1 of the next biennium has to be counted twice, because compared to this 2-year time frame, it occurs twice as an increase. In biennial math then, the request is for our core mission needs compared to this year, it's a $45 million increase in FY24 and a $90 million increase in FY25. Again, that's compared to this year's base in both cases. That is $135 million over the biennium, or a 9.8% increase. When you add in the $35 million beginning in FY24 for the 3 supplemental priorities, which would be an increase starting in year 1, but not growing in year 2, so it's flat for year 2. The increase on our biennial base carried forward is 14.9%. So turning now to our core mission request in more detail, why are we asking for this? Our costs just don't stop. Students expect top shelf services related to their academic experience and their health and well-being, and that requires spending in our budget. As I've mentioned on numerous occasions, we are a people organization, so in this environment of significant competition for talented employees, planning for realistic compensation cost increases, including what it takes to provide market competitive salaries and benefits, is essential if we want to retain and attract high-quality employees that are critical to achieving our goals. Basic infrastructure items also need care and feeding regularly. Today's classrooms with their high-tech options for hybrid instruction and innovative teaching are very expensive to maintain. We also have to keep up many research spaces and equipment within them. And basic facility costs, I'm talking heating, cooling, minor fixes, as well as the costs of remaining compliant with federal and state regulations in a large variety of spaces and activities. All those things continue to increase in cost. And finally, it's important for us to think about the highest programmatic priorities each year and what it will take to achieve our goals, and also what it will take to keep our population safe while we're doing it in physical space, mental space, and cyberspace. These are just high-level bullet points we've talked about before, but to remind us all that we operate a very complex organization with many, many needs to manage. So we feel it is appropriate to ask the state for help in meeting those needs. We propose a partnership. I've listed the major cost drivers that I just referenced on the left of this chart. And then we looked actually at estimating our cost increases for the next couple of years in two different ways. First, we estimate that if inflation stayed at the 8.5% level as it is today, and we apply that to a reasonable estimate of current year spending, it would add $120 million per year in cost to the institution just in our state and tuition-funded activities. However, it's hopefully unlikely that it will stay at the CPI levels across the whole of the next biennium, and it is certainly true that it won't apply evenly to all of our costs. Some items will see costs go up more than inflation, and some, and many actually, will go up less than inflation. In addition, units will decide to buy less or buy differently when faced with high cost increases. So, dropping the inflation estimate down closer to the cost to the personal consumption expenditure index of just over 6% right now would get us to an annual cost increase of roughly $90 million. Simultaneous with running that inflation-based analysis, we also did some more detailed projections looking at specific cost items with refined information, real-time information, if you will, about projected increases. For debt, utilities, technology licensing and maintenance, competitive compensation, fringe benefits, and some miscellaneous purchases, and we got to a need that way as well of roughly $90 million. So triangulating in two different ways, we arrived at what we believe is a reasonable planning assumption for increased budgetary needs. We want to partner with the state on addressing those needs, asking them for 50%, $45 million incremental each year, while we commit to addressing the other 50% through increased tuition revenue growth from enrollment gains where possible and small rate changes, and also combined with continued internal cuts to spending items. The mix of those two actions, as well as any other variables we can bring to bear, would be part of our annual and ongoing discussions with you as we consider the variables for each year's budget along the way. Moving on to the second proposal, we recommend we ask the state to step in now with some modest increases dedicated to priority items that we just will not be able to do in the near term when faced with the cost increases I just referenced. Two of those three items will directly impact student debt. We would like to provide targeted award increases to those Minnesota students with the greatest financial need through increasing the Promise and Promise Plus scholarship programs. The most significant change this $10 million request would allow is the expansion of the income eligibility for Promise from $120,000 to $140,000 and for Promise Plus from $50,000 to $60,000. We would also increase all award levels for the Promise program along the way. Those receiving the minimum award today would see an increase from the minimum of $300 to $500. And those receiving the highest award today would see an increase from roughly $4,000 to $4,300. Promise and Promise Plus support 13,000 to 14,000 students per year today and would support nearly 16,000 students if this $10 million is funded. And the second piece impacting student debt is the new Greater Minnesota Scholarship Program of $20 million, which will allow us to provide targeted awards to all Minnesota undergraduates that enroll at Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester. The program would be designed to attract students to those campuses with significant award amounts in their first year, up to $4,000, and then to retain them with continuing awards, phasing down but remaining large, spread across the remaining 3 years of their academic career. A higher proportion of enrollment on most of these campuses is middle income. Since these students normally experience higher levels of borrowing to finance their education, these awards could directly impact debt levels for Minnesota undergraduates. We estimate this scholarship will support 7,000 to 8,000 Minnesota students when fully phased in.
I'd like to continue on now with the public safety component. Now, this is in addition to the core mission activities that Vice President Tonneson described earlier. Part of our core mission clearly includes maintaining public safety for our faculty, staff, and students and visitors, but we would like to go and do more. And this is a request for the state to partner with us to do more to supplement our public safety investments. First, we would like to double the planned number of security officers on the Twin Cities campus. Adding 14 to 16 more will allow escorts for the 624 walk program, more bike patrols, more building security checks, and an increased security presence on campus. Second, we would like to allow for the expansion of overtime patrol shifts per week, 25 to 30 additional shifts for 6 months of the year, which would provide increased visibility for officers on campus and off and decrease response time to calls. And third, we would like to enhance the lighting and camera capabilities with new mobile trailers, replace police vehicles on a more consistent basis to reduce risk and maintenance costs, and a second K-9 unit for special events and campus safety. And finally, the final item of this $5 million request, actually 60% of it, is for a system-wide plan to replace end-of-life cameras, security equipment, and outdated building access technology. Funding would allow for ongoing maintenance and replacement of the equipment, the IT systems that run the technology, and the people to manage the equipment and the technology. These efforts would help us confront safety concerns and respond even more efficiently and effectively to emergency situations. So in summary, I'd like to talk a little bit about what this biennial budget request reflects. We think it reflects the values and priorities of the university because the budget request supports our core mission and thereby helps the university to support the state of Minnesota and its residents. But it also helps us deliver a top quality education experience to our students and families, which is why they come to the University of Minnesota in the first place. The university's budget request provides the necessary state support so that we can move forward on 3 specific initiatives to address the financial and safety concerns of those students and families in the future. We also believe the budget request is responsible. We're asking for what we need to accomplish these goals. We know that we cannot close this gap in state funding over the last decade in one budget request. We understand that we cannot adjust the budget cycle for the loss of buying power over the last 15 years, or to gain back that higher percentage allocated to the university. Rather, our budget position reflects the real needs of the university system, where increased state support would help the university deliver high-quality teaching, research, and service to the people of Minnesota. And with that, Vice Chair Hibbs, we are available for questions and look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on this topic? I'll just add my comment. I really like the budget in general. I think it's very well thought out, and I especially like the $5 million that you're asking for public safety and the $30 million for the Promise and the outstate school scholarships. I think it's really vital for Minnesota to keep all of our campuses, both at the University of Minnesota and M-State, full of students. And I think that this is a really good way for the legislature to help us do that and to to make an investment in all of us, including us and M-State, and to fill the campuses up. It's going to be a huge investment because as these students live and work in Minnesota after college, we're going to need them here. So those are the two things I really like about it. I think it's well done. My compliments to you and your team for putting it together. So, and I'll now turn it over to Regent Verhalen.
Thanks, Chair Hipsch. Just a question for SVP Franz, excuse me. Of the $5 million for public safety, just clarification first, that's for all of the campuses, correct?
Correct.
And then, is that enough? I mean, is that really enough to not only make the significant changes that have been identified and are being identified with the Public Safety Committee here for the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, but then our other campuses as well? UMD has its own police force. The other campuses have their own security concerns and safety concerns as well. Is $5 million enough?
Vice Chair Hips, Regent Verhalen. Well, let me answer that by saying, I would say that I would never say that's enough. I always would like more, but I know there are limited resources. What we're trying to do, and that's why the core mission, if we get the state to partner with us on the core mission request of $45 million a year and then increasing that next year, that will support and maintaining what we're currently doing in all campuses. What we're trying to do with the $5 million special request is to step up that process. It really is the first step, to your point. And if we could take this first step to begin this process of modernization of the infrastructure, the security infrastructure that goes with public safety, that would be a huge step for us. We've not been able to make those kind of investments for way too many years. We have a lot of cameras and technology that are just out of date, and we would like to upgrade those. And really, when you upgrade those and bring the IT with it and the people to manage them, they're going to provide a new way that we can look at the campus security that we've never had before. We think that will provide us some insight. What is the second and third step? So I would say this is a good first step, but I would say we're never really finished on this endeavor.
Regent Verhalen?
I have several other questions, but I will yield to the rest of the regents right now. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go to Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. If I could just very quickly remind me of a number, if you would. The number being 1% of tuition raises how much in revenue?
Vice Chair Hipsch, Regent Svegum never can just give you one number, right? So a 1% increase on, I assume you're speaking about undergraduates,
Yes,
first
I
of
am,
all.
Julie, yes.
Undergraduates on all campuses would be 6 million. On the Twin Cities campus alone, it's 4.5.
Okay, thank you, Julie. I
sorry.
strongly support.
Let me correct Matt.
I'm sorry.
Resident is 4.5. 6 million is all undergraduates. Resident is 4.5. Twin Cities is 3.3 of that 4.5.
Very good. I thought that was close to the number that you usually give us. Then I asked that number of members so that we enter into this proposed budget eyes wide open. I strongly support the president's proposal before us for a budget request. I think it's balanced. I think it's reasonable. I think it brings together a lot of the needs of the university. But eyes wide open. If we're anticipating potentially a $90 million additional cost to the university for services, that would be salaries and all our costs over the next 2 years. And we're expecting the state to pick up half, $45 million. And we're expecting to pick up half, 45 right here, I think. And it says in your budget proposal that we'll do it either by tuition and or cost savings. I'm going to tell you that our cost savings is not going to be great. We're already down, Ken, 1,000 people. I think your number is 972, I think, is what you, the number I remember. We're not going to be down another 972 folks in the next year. Not going to happen. So that 45 million in this proposed budget is probably going to be more back on the backs of tuition than cost savings. And that's even given that the state comes forward with their 45 million as the share. 45 and 45 and 30, that's what, 125 million. Maybe not going to happen. Eyes wide open. So with our eyes wide open, even if the budget comes forward as proposed, which I think is good, I think it's as good as we can do, President Gable, you're looking at some place between a 6 and an 8% tuition increase. Someplace in that. And if the rest of the budget, if the state doesn't come through with its money, or Mr. Horstman can't reduce another 1,972 of full-time equivalents, which he's not going to do, that 6 to 8% could be more. So just enter into this eyes wide open. Don't come next May when we get to the president, June when we get to the president's final budget and say you're surprised. Don't be surprised.
Good points. Any follow-up comments? Okay, thank you. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. Just a couple thoughts. First, I'll kind of repeated this numerous times, but I'm not a fan of, I don't support, let me rephrase. I fully support the intent of the Promise Scholarship, but I believe that should come from philanthropy. I've never understood the concept and never supported the concept that we're ultimately expecting student A to fund student B. The state of Minnesota taxes on a progressive standard on an objective basis. This is how much money this taxpayer earns, this is their rate, this is what they pay. But then when you get to college, you've got a student who may or may not have access to family income, who may or may not have access to, or whose family may or may not have disposable income despite meeting that threshold. So again, it gives the appearance of affordability and access, but that on a case-by-case basis, I don't know that that's true. In fact, I think for some, it's the opposite. The other component of using state funding for the Promise Scholarship, meaning this targeted aid, that doesn't stop the increases in tuition from consuming more than what is being provided from the Promise Scholarship. So I would much rather see that money invested in holding the line on tuition across the board, and then looking to our foundation and other philanthropic entities to provide targeted aid in that respect, so that at least it's coming from those that have the resources and not from those who may or may not have those resources. I'm also interested, when we talk about the Greater Minnesota Student Scholarship, this appears to be, maybe a marketing strategy of sorts, but, we know that across our system campuses, we've got different results, we've got different enrollment challenges. If that money were simply applied to their budgets and reduced their tuition sticker price, would that have the impact of having more people, because right now we've, among some of the regional peers, we find ourselves a bit more expensive, so I think some people may not even be applying. So if that 20 million was actually just simply applied to those campuses to reduce their base tuition, that may have a greater impact on applications to fill those seats. I understand, I guess, the one advantage I see is that you can target this to Minnesota students instead of having differential rates, but for resident and non-resident rates, but I think that's something to consider. But as members, one of the best descriptions I've ever encountered as far as the role of a trustee or a regent is that we play the role of constructive skeptic, and we ask questions to try to improve the overall performance and mission fulfillment of the institution. And one of the things that that I think is going to be a challenge with us, and I'm interested in how we address this, because I've heard this from numerous sources in the last several years. But even with reduced state funding on a real dollar basis, let alone an adjusted basis, we've had our administrative costs, in particularly in salary, since 2008, even with less state money, it's almost doubled for some of the marquee compensation rates. And so I'm kind of curious if we put this forward, what's our argument to the state to provide the additional resources when compared to the other public entities that are reliant on state funding to meet their mission? How do we explain to them that we're going to be good stewards and that we have the greatest need when you put it in that context.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Mayor Pence?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hips, and thank you, Regent Rocha. I think, the concern that we have in partnering with the state is that the commitment to the University of Minnesota and the overall benefits of the university, as we all know, are enormous to the state of Minnesota. And it's not that they don't, our policy friends don't recognize that. It's just that I think our request at this point is that, given the current state of the state's budget, the surplus that they have, that this is a right time for them to invest more in the university than they have in recent times. And I think one of the ways we talk about being a good partner with them is making sure that we provide the kind of access to to Minnesota students, which I think the Promise program and the Greater Scholarship program would do, but also to do it in a way that promotes the investment in Minnesota in terms of the intersections, areas that we talk about with agricultural and healthcare and food. I think that one of the things that we want to just have that conversation with the state to make sure that we're engaged in defining the future of the state of Minnesota, because the university is such an important player in that role. And we believe this is the right time for the state to have this opportunity to invest more with the state going forward.
Follow-up?
It becomes, Mr. Chair, thank you, it becomes very complex because again, I'm just thinking of it from the standpoint of, every entity that appears before the state legislature has, the value of K-12, E-12 is immeasurable. The value of providing support for folks dealing with infants born with addiction. I mean, anything that you come up with is going to provide some sort of a great claim, and I'm just, my concern is whether there's, how we address skepticism about if we get more money from the state, we will just simply have higher compensation rates within certain categories, or, I'm just really wondering how I respond to that. How do I answer that question and say, well, for instance, would we as a board, as an institution, take a position that with this additional funding, we will freeze compensation rates within these categories for the next 5 years or something like this, so that they know that when the investment's there, it's going to the students, it's going to the research, as opposed to a range of compensation that is unknown in virtually any other public sector environment. So those are my concerns, and I'm somewhat pessimistic that I'll have an answer to that I can fully receive it, but I do think it's a question worth asking and a point worth making. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. I just want to add, I think you have to look at it, if the University of Minnesota is the economic development engine of the state, the more they invest with us, the more they're going to have in taxes down the road to help fulfill the missions of the other things that you talk about. So we have to, we can't cut off our nose to spite our face, I think the investment is good at the University of Minnesota, and, right now the state of Minnesota is faced with a really nice problem of having a huge surplus. And this is the time when you really want to invest in economic development and do these things. And to your comment about the foundation and getting more money out of the foundation, we are in really some tough economic times right now. There isn't a good place to hide in these markets. So it's going to take a while for the markets to recover for the foundation and for the whole world. So I don't think that's going to be a really great source of increasing income for us as well. So next is Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hipsch, and just wanted to add one comment besides thanks for the presentation. It was actually kind of along the lines of my colleague Regent Verhalen. When I was reading this, I also had the question, should we be going more than $5 million for public safety. And so I appreciate that dialogue. Unsurprisingly, I'm very supportive of this and excited to see this building upon the efforts that we're already making. And I think particularly for this public safety part, we're in a unique position to be able to bring together a lot of the groups that have been engaging on this topic that Vice President Kramer are working with, internal and external to the university, to advocate for this. I hope we're able to kind of come together collaboratively, harness all of that energy, which I think we're already doing debatably for all sorts of stuff related to public safety, clearly with the new committee, and channel that through UMAA, through our government relations team, through kind of all of our different arms and the ways that we advocate at the legislature around this public safety request. Because just throughout this conversation, I have a better understanding of, how does this go above and beyond of what we're already doing? And I heard you say that, this gets at that infrastructure piece. So I think it's clear that this is going above and beyond what our responsibility is to be active in the moment right now, which we are. And so hoping to see us be able to harness a lot of that energy to advocate for this at the legislature. And that's what stood out to me in particular during this presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. So are you saying you think it should be higher than the 5 million?
I'm comfortable with the exchange, that I heard just a little bit ago, prompted by Regent Verhalen. But of course, I support more than that. So,
Thanks. Any follow-up? Okay. Any more discussion from anyone on the board? If not, we're gonna. Yeah, go ahead.
Just very quickly.
Yep, go
It
ahead.
gives me the opportunity to support my friend Regent Rocha just very quickly regarding the Promise Scholarship. Members, you've heard me say this before. I understand in our system of this country, we collect taxes. We redistribute from the federal government, Pell. We redistribute from the state government, state scholarship and grants and aids. But I really would not like us to see an increase in the Promise Scholarship from $120,000 to $140,000 of family income. I agree with Regent Rocha. I don't understand the philosophy of charging student A more for student B to get an increased scholarship internally. That's what we use our federal and our state dollars for. Who was it who said the best form of scholarship is tuition? Dave Rowe.
Former Regent David Rowe, AFL-CIO president.
That's who it was. Thank you. Thank you. Pardon.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Pardon me? Oh, student representative, go ahead. I'm sorry, I missed you.
Thank you. No, you're totally fine. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Yeah.
Vice President Meyer and friends, I just had a question regarding the public safety request that the board has been examining. I've noticed within the supplemental budget request that was passed last year that the university requested roughly $100 million for public safety, all of which was not appropriated with the last legislative session. And then looking in this docket, I realized that the request has been narrowed to $5 million. I'm just wondering if you could clarify the discrepancy between the total cost request and what has been removed between the $95 million deficit between the two appropriations.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and Student Representative Wallenhorst. Well, I think one of the things that we tried to do last year in the December amendment to the state request was to fix the entire system all at once. I mean, that was a 3-year plan to virtually improve and replace the entire security infrastructure, both in terms of IT and the building access codes, the cameras and lighting and that. What we wanted to state at that time, because of the large budget surplus, we wanted this to let the state have an opportunity to join us in doing a one-time 3-year overall plan. So we've scaled that back and tried to say, well, what's the first step in that process? And we believe that the 5-year plan, recurring plan, would help us get started on that. It's clearly a lot of money over time to redo the entire system. But this focus was on what can we accomplish in this next session for public safety. So that's part of the reaction to what happened or didn't happen in the last session.
Thank you.
Any follow-up, or you're okay? Yep. Okay, we're going to move right along to the third item on our agenda, which is a review of the President's recommended 2022 six-year capital plan. And we have Senior Vice President Franz. You can proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. So this is going to be a shorter presentation than we usually bring you in September because as you noted, that was noted, there was no bonding bill in this last year, and there wasn't one the year before that. This is really unprecedented territory. So because the state has not invested in capital funds for the state's asset, not just the university, but Minnesota State, University of Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, this state funding makes up the largest portion of the university's six-year plan. It comes from state funding. Given the uncertainty of that funding now, we felt it was best to have the board review and approve the same six-year plan that we did last year. And I'll explain why we wanted to do that. Now, we did, as you recall, we did amend the six-year plan in December of last year to make an increased state request. But the six-year plan is required by board policy, and it's the document that sets forth the direction for major capital projects. This is a multi-year planning process that ensures that we're focusing our limited resources and limited capacity on our highest priority projects. So in addition to the actual plan that's in your material, you'll see that there's a list of projects that are called under consideration. These projects are presented to the board in order to provide transparency so that you can see the major capital initiatives that are not yet ready to be included in the plan. Now, work continues on these under consideration projects. Some may come to fruition and some may not, but we want to provide a clear picture of the broader pipeline of projects that may come before you in the coming year or years. If you go to the next slide, as we mentioned earlier, the state's failed to pass a bonding bill during the last two sessions. This lack of capital investment 2 years in a row, as I mentioned, is unprecedented. For this reason, we're submitting for your consideration the same plan you approved last year as amended in the December action. Now, in this particular chart, you'll notice that the requested amounts, the gray bar, the University of Minnesota request from 2013 through 2022, that total request is $2.7 billion. The actual, the green bar, is $421 million, or 16% of what was requested over this time period. So as we go into the last slide, we have not updated the cost figures that are in the plan at this time. Most of the figures that you see in this plan are planning estimates, and also under construction market inflation right now, which is estimated to be about 12%, makes it extremely difficult for us to estimate and update these projections that we had last year. So rather than just arbitrarily inflate these planning numbers with new inflation estimates, we plan to refine these costs over the next year and really more clearly define the project and come up with a capital budget that we think is closer to reality. So we're going to remain open to new opportunities. We will adjust our plan in consultation with the board as funding becomes available. So this is presented for your review today. So we'll bring this back in October for your action. But in December, we will present our recommendations for the capital planning in more detail as part of the strategic facilities discussion we have planned for December. And at that time, we'll present to the board the 2023 state capital request, which will have more opportunity to review and plan for at this time. We think it's a better time for your review of that in December. So with that, Mr. Vice Chair, any questions?
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. One question, and I guess this is also becoming somewhat repetitive, but a few years back we had on the Twin Cities campus anyway, the Armory was slated for some major potential investment. Is that, what's the status of that? And I guess I'll leave that question at that.
Senior Vice President.
Mr. Vice Chair and Regent Rocha, I know that I do recall what you're saying, that it was on that list. I know it's still on our list, but I don't know the status of that right now. I'll have to get back to you on that, if that's okay.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions from any? We're hearing none. I think we'll take a 10-minute break. Okay, I call the Finance and Operations Committee back to order. Our next item is an overview of the 2021 Employee Engagement Survey, and we have Vice President Horstman and Brandon Sullivan, our Senior Director, Talent Strategy, are here to walk us through the results. Vice President Horstman, would you like to start us off on this item?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hips, members of the board, SVP, VP France, and President Gable. The university has been a leader in higher education since 2013, when Senior Director Sullivan and his team in OHR created, developed, and implemented the first engagement survey for the university. Over the last 10 years, much progress has been made, and the outcomes from the survey have served as the employment engagement metric for the university. Today, Senior Director Sullivan will discuss the high-level results from the 2021 survey, as well as significant trends over time and the support the engagement survey provides to the commitments of MPACT 2025. Engagement requires leadership accountability, especially for follow-up to survey results, taking action based on feedback from faculty and staff. To that end, the Office of Human Resources has restructured its talent strategy work into one organization focused on leadership training and development, talent acquisition, and talent management, given the intersections that exist daily between these disciplines. I will now turn it over to Senior Director Sullivan for the presentation. Brandon.
Go ahead. Thank you. Vice Chair Hipsch, members of the committee. At the university, we define employee engagement as the level of employee energy and motivation supported or hindered by the work environment. And that's a very intentional and very important definition. Many organizations primarily focus on commitment and dedication and not as much on the work environment. But we know that employees who are exerting their best efforts in their job will thrive and continue to give their best in a work environment that supports their efforts. We also know that the most committed and dedicated employees will become frustrated and are likely to leave an organization if the work environment isn't supportive of their efforts. The university's engagement survey is intended to focus leaders on taking action by measuring two key areas: commitment and dedication, and effective environment. Both metrics are shaped by key drivers, and you can see those drivers in the gold boxes. Each of those drivers is measured by a number of items on the survey itself. These drivers provide more specific areas of focus, which will have the most impact on engagement. The sixth employee engagement survey was administered to benefits eligible faculty and staff in October of 2021. We conduct the survey every other year to provide time for leaders to take action on data. Many of you may be aware of organizations that do engagement surveys more frequently. It's not uncommon to see organizations that do annual engagement surveys. Some organizations even will do one every 6 months, and there are increasingly organizations that sort of do real-time data collection from employees to understand what's happening real-time in their workforces. However, as we have thought about what fits best with the academic cycle and the academic rhythm of the university, we feel like a biannual survey seems to be a good balance between getting timely feedback and providing opportunity for action before gathering additional feedback. To ensure confidentiality of the survey, which is a very important part of the survey, each employee receives a unique link, and their responses are submitted directly to our survey vendor, Korn Ferry. The survey itself is made up of 40 questions, and these questions measure those drivers and key metrics you saw on the previous slide. Those items were created in partnership with a group of faculty at the university as well as with our vendor, and they represent kind of a hybrid survey that took some off-the-shelf items and tailored them to our environment here at the University of Minnesota. There are, in addition to those 40 questions, there are 2 open-ended questions that allow employees to provide qualitative feedback on things that are going well, as well as things that are not going so well and ideas for improvement. There are slightly different surveys for faculty and staff, just so you're aware. The surveys measure the same things. They measure the drivers of engagement and engagement, but because the roles are slightly different, some of the wording is a little different on the 2 surveys so that they reflect those differences in the work. Leaders who receive at least 5 faculty or 5 staff responses to the survey received a report of results in January of 2021, and the expectation, or I'm sorry, yes, 2022, sorry, what year is it? And the expectation was that those results would be discussed with their teams, departments, units, and then action would have been taken on those results. I'll review in a little more detail some of the findings from the survey on subsequent slides, but I want to give you kind of a high level what are some of the key things that we see. First of all, in 2021, the commitment and dedication key metric did decline slightly. I'll say a little more about that. The effective environment key metric increased slightly over the previous survey in 2019. I do want to say that overall our results are in line with what you see as for benchmarks for high-performing organizations. And I would note there aren't good benchmarks for higher education. We are one of the few universities that is doing this work system-wide, but we do have benchmarks for high-performing organizations that typically represent more private sector, but that does give us some indication, some comparison to look at. And on those 2 metrics, we are in range for high-performing organizations. I'll say a little more about that in a few minutes. We added a sense of belonging driver to the survey in 2021 as part of the Impact 2025 commitment to community and belonging, and I will also go into a little detail on that in a few minutes as well. And then in terms of action, which is the whole purpose of the survey, is really to gather feedback from faculty and staff, to share that feedback in a way that allows for action to be taken. One of the challenges that we see this year is that there was a decline in faculty and staff feeling like action was taken from the survey over previous years. In fact, the survey items asking about action taken had the largest declines of any items on the survey. Now, what I would say is that prior to the pandemic, the percent of faculty and staff seeing action taken was going up every time we did the survey. We were on a pretty good path of seeing action taken and seeing improvements. The survey results were available just a few months before of the 2019 survey were available in January of 2020. A couple of months later, things really changed, and focus, I think, reasonably probably wasn't on taking action on survey results in March and April of 2020. So on the one hand, the decline in seeing action taken probably isn't surprising. On the other hand, we do feel that this is something that really needs some renewed attention and focus. I would also mention that in many cases, I'm personally aware of action that was taken but wasn't necessarily communicated because of everything that was going on at the time. So for your average faculty or staff member, they may not even be aware that things were done in response to some of the feedback because that communication loop wasn't necessarily closed as everybody was dealing with the effects of the pandemic. So we are conducting a follow-up survey in October, in a few weeks actually, and the focus of that survey is really to encourage action and accountability for taking action on the results of the previous survey. One way to understand the engagement of our faculty and staff is to look at the percentage whose experiences fall into 4 different categories. If you start on the upper right box, the engaged, these are faculty and staff who say that they have a high level of commitment and dedication, and they report that they work in a very effective environment. For our faculty and staff in 2021, we had 41% of faculty and 51% of staff in that category. Going down to the box below that, the frustrated, the lower right box, these are employees who said, I'm committed and dedicated, but there are challenges in my work environment. There are things that aren't as supportive as they could or should be. We had about 1 in 4 faculty and staff in that category. And I'll say a little bit more about that because that category is where we tend to focus a lot of effort, is identifying what are those things that are getting in the way in the work environment so that we can then enable those committed faculty and staff to be more successful and to retain them as well. Those who are disengaged, so moving over to the lower left box, these are employees who are saying they're not as committed and dedicated and their work environment isn't as effective. We see 29% of faculty and 21% of staff in that category. To give you a little bit of a benchmark for what does that mean, that can potentially look a little concerning. When you look at high-performing organizations that are large and complex like ours, you usually have about 20 to 25% of employees in the disengaged box. Now, you may want to move them all into the engaged box, and that's worthwhile, right? This is really more of a continuous improvement exercise around employee engagement. It's not a matter of doing a couple of big things and moving all of those folks up to engaged. It's really a matter of understanding what are some of those factors that are driving some disengagement that we can take action on at the university level, the college level, campus, or department level, and those issues will ebb and flow over time. So I just wanted to give a little context for that particular box. So we're pretty much in line there with what you see in high-performing organizations. And then detached, the last box, this is one where you have employees who say, I have a great work environment, I'm just not that committed and dedicated. We don't have a lot of people at the university who fall into that category. You see a lot more in the private sector. Honestly, that's one of the things that's different. We have more frustrated and fewer detached. We're a mission-driven organization, so people don't tend to lack the commitment and dedication and have a great environment. So that's not as interesting of a focus for us. I do want to share a little bit about broader trends in engagement, again, to sort of really put this in context so you can maybe have a little context for what this all might mean for the rest of the conversation today. So one of the things that we see broadly nationally is a challenge to faculty engagement. There's a lot of evidence that faculty disengagement has gone up a little bit in the last couple of years, largely as a result of the challenges, the demands, the changes that many faculty had to deal with in light of the pandemic. Just as one example, many faculty members had to go from teaching in person to teaching fully online very, very quickly. And as someone who has done that, I know it is a whole different set of skills to design and teach a class online fully than it is to do it in the classroom. And yet we needed many of our faculty to very quickly make that change, in addition to lots of other things that faculty were dealing with. So that, I think, is a really important focus area for us going forward, is addressing how can we help to support faculty engagement. And I know there's a lot going on now already to do that, but that is something in the data that stands out. The other thing that we see, another trend that's more of a national trend, is for quite a while during the pandemic, engagement in the private sector was going up. There was a lot of data showing that people were more productive, they were more engaged for the most part. Certainly not everybody was, but the data on average was going up. There were a lot of questions about how sustainable that was. And now what we're seeing in the data coming out of the private sector is there's more issues around burnout. There's more issues around mental health challenges that organizations are dealing with. And now we're starting to see engagement starting to decline a bit in the private sector. And so I share these trends so that you can kind of have a sense for engagement is something that it's a dynamic thing that responds to what's happening in the world, what's happening within organizations. And we're seeing a lot of the same things play out here in our data. And so really what we want to do is think about how can we be essentially ahead of our competitors in addressing these issues and supporting our faculty and staff in dealing with these challenges. And that, I think, is the key to really attracting, retaining, and supporting talent at the university. The last thing I want to mention on this slide is that frustrated category. That is where we always over-index compared to a lot of other benchmarks. So we had about 1 in 4 of our faculty and staff in that category. In high-performing private sector organizations, it's usually 1 in 10. The nature of higher education, I'm sure, is a part of that. But that also is where there's a lot of action, a lot of initiatives at the university level and at the college and department and campus levels to address some of those challenges that faculty and staff are facing around the work environment. This graph shows you, or is intended to show you, that the experiences of faculty and staff when it comes to engagement vary widely. There definitely are, there's aspects of engagement that are impacted by university-wide policies, practices, and conditions, and I just mentioned even national trends that impact engagement. There are also a lot of things that happen at the college and department level that will impact engagement. What you see here, each of those dots is a group of faculty or staff in a college or a department, a college or an administrative unit. The vertical axis is in effective environment, low to high. The horizontal axis is commitment and dedication, low to high. The intention of this is not to call out individual colleges, but to show you that it varies widely. So action, and the point of that is that taking action on engagement has to happen at multiple levels at the same time. It's not enough just to have a university-wide initiative. It's also not enough just to have a department initiative to address engagement. So I'll give you an example that might help put some concrete aspects to this. So when we look at what those survey items are that are the key drivers of engagement, those items that most strongly correlate with engagement, one of them, and this is true for faculty and staff, I feel that I belong at the University of Minnesota. That is one of the top drivers of engagement when we look at the survey items. And of course, that's a university-wide thing that's impacted also at the local level. The second, I have trust and confidence in my college leadership team, right? That's something that's really college level. The third I would call out is my department has a strategy and goals that address our most important challenges and opportunities, so department level. So there you see, it really has to happen at multiple levels in order to address engagement. So the survey response rate has been really strong for the engagement survey. Every time we've done the survey, the response rate from faculty and staff has gone up. And I would, my belief is that this record response rate reflects that faculty and staff see the survey as a useful and important tool for improvement. In my experience, and there's data on this too, response rates to surveys are usually a function of how much people think it's going to matter. If they don't think it's going to matter, they're not going to take the survey. If they think it is going to matter, they'll take the survey. So we've seen that response rate go up. We've seen over time until the last round action taken going up. So that's again why we really want to focus right now on how to support and encourage and create accountability for taking action, because we've got all this great, I would say, goodwill from faculty and staff in terms of using the survey to provide useful feedback. We want to kind of keep that going. One last thing, I'm often asked about the difference between faculty and staff response rates, and they are there. You can see them. That's not unique to the University of Minnesota. I don't think I've ever seen a survey done in higher ed where you didn't have faculty responding at a little bit of a lower rate than staff, and we could talk about why that might be, but I think it's largely related to their roles. But I just wanted you to know that's not unique to the university. Commitment and dedication. This is a metric that's under commitment 4 in Impact 2025 with a goal of increasing commitment and dedication to 77% in 2025. In 2021, we saw a slight decrease of 2 points to 73% overall, and you can see the decrease for faculty was a little bit larger, a result of some of the things that I mentioned earlier. The norm, the Korn Ferry norm, just for your information, for high-performing organizations on this is 74%. So I just want to point out that our goal is a very high bar. I would say, though, that achieving that is an important part of continuing to compete successfully in attracting, retaining, and supporting talented faculty, staff, and students. I know for a fact our peer institutions are not sitting still on this. They are working on becoming better places to work. They are working on becoming places that really attract and retain top faculty, staff, and students. So they're doing a lot of the same things we're trying to do. So I think it's appropriate to have a high bar, but I do want to point out it is a high bar. We are not aiming low on engagement. Effective environment is the other key metric, and this we saw a slight increase to 69% favorable overall. That's in line with high-performing organization norms in many ways, but that is where we see the most opportunity generally at the university, and a lot of initiatives that are happening now are focused on how can we create a more effective work environment where things aren't quite as supportive or efficient or effective as they maybe need to be. Engagement, as we've talked about a little bit already, happens at multiple levels. There's a big local aspect to it, but it is also helpful to look at university-wide. What are some themes that we see? And one lens you can use is to look at what are the most favorable survey items system-wide. So this tells you, these favorability numbers are very, very high, very strong. This tells you that most places across the system, faculty and staff are feeling good about the items represented on this slide. And then on the flip side, you can look at the least favorable items and get a sense for what some of the common challenges are. And as you look at these items, again, it reflects a lot of that theme about the work environment, around efficiency, effectiveness, barriers to getting work done, workload, these kinds of things. And that's one of the things my team does a lot of, is consulting with departments and colleges and units on these issues. So they'll get their survey results back, and what do we do now? How do we dig into this? And so that has been a real focus of a lot of the efforts that my team has put in, and is helping with that. And I think that the efforts, for example, with the Peak Initiative, are also aimed at helping with this and providing some tools and resources and structure that can help with that. For the first time, we added a survey item in 21 on work arrangements. We didn't, until this point, have any system-wide data that told us, what people were experiencing in terms of work arrangements. We had provided some guidance around that, but each college, campus, and unit, was working on what arrangements best fit the work that we have and our goals and priorities. And so this gave us a nice view into what the work arrangements look like. The gold represents hybrid work arrangements, so that's a combination of in-person and remote. The gray represents fully on-site, and the maroon represents fully remote. I would point out this data, it was from last October, and so this is an ongoing thing at the university, where each college, campus, and unit is looking at what works for us and how do we need to adjust to meet student needs and expectations, for example. But this was really helpful in getting us a sense for where are we at today. I want to talk a little bit about the new survey dimension, sense of belonging, that we added. And we added this dimension for a number of reasons. The main reason, the most important reason, was to support the increased focus on creating a welcoming and inclusive campus climate. And as you all know, we just welcomed the most racially and ethnically diverse freshman class ever, and one of the largest. And one of the keys to our ability to really support them in being successful and graduating and having a good student experience is going to be the campus climate. The engagement survey doesn't ask students questions, but the faculty and the staff who interact with the students and who have a big role in creating that kind of campus climate that we need, they do take the survey. And so that's where there's a really important connection that I see between taking action on the sense of belonging results and the engagement results and our ability to really be successful in supporting our freshman class. The other piece, the other reason that we did this is more broadly to support equity and inclusion efforts. One of the things that engagement surveys can be very helpful with is identifying where people don't feel like they have a seat at the table, they don't feel like they have a voice, or people are not represented. And so we can use the data to help get some more insight into what some of the actions could be that would improve the climate, that could improve inclusivity and equity, and ultimately result in the diversity that's needed. As with the other metrics, sense of belonging varied quite a bit, as you can see here across the system. Again, each dot represents faculty or staff in a particular college or unit. And the goal here isn't to call anyone out, but is to just show that this is something that we really want leaders at the local level to look at their data and take action. And we have resources on our team and others who can help with that. And I want to really emphasize that connection between sense of belonging and engagement. When we look at the biggest gap between engaged and disengaged faculty and staff, sense of belonging is the biggest gap. And so that's something that we really want to emphasize for action. And sense of belonging can look different in different places, but it's really about understanding where are people not experiencing that, and then how can we address that. So this is going to be, I think, a really strategically important area of focus for us going forward. And then action is the purpose of the survey. So one of the important things is really encouraging that action. We have some data from our survey that shows that when faculty and staff perceive that action is being taken, it has some really important positive outcomes. So you can see here that when faculty and staff feel that action was taken, their levels of commitment and dedication are about as high as you can get, 91 and 92%. It also, when people feel action is taken, they're much more likely to feel that work barriers are being removed. They're much more likely to recommend the university as a great place to work. And we've done some analysis with our vendor on retention, and they're more likely to stay at the university if they feel that action is being taken. So this data, combined with the fact that a lot of faculty and staff aren't sure if action was taken on the last survey, really leads us into our focus on how do we build more accountability and support in this time. Been very challenging times, obviously, for everybody. So I'm going to turn it over now to Vice President Horstman to discuss the next steps.
So before we stop for questions, we did want to talk about what accountability means in engagement. And, I do want to take a moment to recognize when this survey was taken, and in the prior year, obviously, there were environmental factors in the workplace and in the community that impacted our faculty, staff, and students. And there were many efforts by leaders put forward toward advancing engagement during this time. We can't really neatly define the impact of the pandemic on employee engagement for faculty, staff, and even student workers. It is a fact that all of us struggled with significant challenges, that there were strains personally and professionally, and that there was a dramatic increase in the feeling of uncertainty during this time. All of that was significant. And during this time, the university had to take some significant actions while we supported employment and didn't have wide workforce reductions. We did have a slowdown in hiring. We did have budget reallocations. We did have a retirement incentive program that was very successful. We had a pay reduction for a number of employees. And external market conditions developed that put a pressure on retention as well. These factors play an even more important role in affirming that the engagement process is so very important for job satisfaction and for retention. Additional accountability measures beyond what we do today, such as leadership assessment in regard to engagement, involving it in unit strategic plans, and considering it when in the budget compact process at the unit level are all important and can influence the level of engagement in the future. It's not a dollar for dollar correlation, but as Brandon will tell you, employers with high engagement generally operate more efficiently through more collaboration and with better results. Finally, in mentioning PEAK, we do strive to see the results of PEAK establish an improved employment experience. We should see more consistent support for employees, clearer career paths, and professional development that can be more meaningful than in our current environment. System-wide improvements and additional focus on leadership accountability can also result in a more engaged university environment. So with this, we conclude our presentation and we welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your great presentation. This is really great stuff. I really enjoyed it. Especially lately in the news, it's been all over the news about employee engagement. I think Bloomberg had an article yesterday, and to know that we already have our survey done and now we can react to it, I think that's really important. I think it's really challenging times we are. I mean, you nailed it when you said that I think the private sector is way behind us, and we are. We are. It's really, some of the numbers they're throwing out, it's just kind of crazy. And so I want to commend you for that. My question is, so you have some 95%ers, I'll call them 95%ers, you have some 45%ers. Do they know who they are? And do you use the best practices from the 95%ers to help the 45%ers? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I don't know how to ask the question very well, so.
Now, Vice Chair Herbst, members of the committee, yeah, that's a really good question, an important question. So one of the things that we're trying to do, just to provide a little bit of context for that, is frame the engagement survey as a supportive developmental exercise, not as a grade or an evaluation, which is where most people go right away, right? Many leaders I've handed the results to, and I've been on the receiving end of it too. It's hard not to see numbers that aren't perfect, you know, as anything other than criticism of you, which isn't helpful in terms of action. So we do like to create a little bit of friendly competition that can kind of hit, I think, the sweet spot of, yeah, what, you know, who is doing really well at this and how can we learn from them? And so we have been doing some work to highlight through sort of case studies or sort of spotlights some colleges and departments and units that are taking action. In some cases, actually have been doing things since 2013 when we did our first engagement survey that have really been doing this as part of their, you know, strategic planning every year and part of their day-to-day operations. And something we're in the middle of right now is collecting another round of those case studies to really help, particularly in the academic units. A lot of the best practices from the private sector can translate into the non-academic units fairly well, but it's really different in some of the colleges and in our campuses. And so that's where we're trying to really elevate some of those. And I would just mention, for example, the School of Nursing. We've worked with them for many years. The dean joined me at a board meeting several years ago to talk about the work that they have been doing on engagement. And so there are some others. So I think there's a lot more we can do, because I think, to your point, that is one of the ways we can help build more of that accountability in a positive way, is by highlighting what's working and setting that as sort of an example.
Thank you. Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hipsch. First, thank you for the presentation, and second, perhaps my question is more of a help me understand question. I agree that it's very important that we should demonstrate action, and it sounds like, you know, we're on that. And so I'm wondering, the follow-up survey in October to demonstrate action, maybe I'm just not familiar with the methodology here, but understanding, you know, that every organization suffers with response rate issues and whatnot, I guess I'm not, or want to understand why another survey to demonstrate action as opposed to a report or something like, how is that going to work, that follow-up survey to show the action that we took from a survey?
Yeah, Representative Farnsworth, Vice Chair Hipsch. Yeah, that we certainly don't want to create more survey fatigue, another survey that sits on a shelf. The survey that we're doing in a few weeks is not the engagement survey. It's a much shorter survey that asks basically about what are some examples you've seen of actions that have been effective. What are some actions that you think would be effective? And then there's a couple questions about, you know, have you seen the results of the survey and that kind of thing. So it's intended to, it's a very short survey. The feedback is intended to be primarily qualitative so that people, leaders especially as a starting point, will get data from their faculty and staff saying, here's what we've seen and here's what we'd like to see. And the idea is that that will prompt more of that conversation around digging into the data. We intentionally didn't. We considered doing what you might call a pulse survey, which would be a shorter version of the actual survey. But to your, I think to point that you might be getting at here, we didn't want to just measure again. We wanted to do something that would hopefully create more accountability for action, as well as raise up examples of action that seems to be effective. Because once we see all those answers to the question of what are some actions you've seen that were effective, we can share some of those things, de-identified of course, but share some of those things across the system.
Quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
So just, I want to repeat back just to make sure I'm understanding. So the follow-up survey in October is to asking specific questions to engage or to gauge whether faculty and staff are seeing the actions that we've been taking instead of us presenting the actions that we took from the survey in some sort of report form or something.
Correct.
Okay. I totally trust that we've got this down. I'm just trying to understand. So thank you.
And if I may add, Vice Chair Hipsch, Regent Farnsworth, you know, the survey is developed and administered centrally and pushed out, but the real work is engaged in a decentralized way in the units. So local leadership, deans, senior-most administrative leaders, they are the ones accountable for making progress. And so this is really to capture everything that's going on across the system. that can help us learn and as we go out and consult, support the work that is going on or initiate work where it isn't happening. So that's really the intent.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion by anyone? Okay, hearing none, I want to thank you for your presentation, and we'll move on to the agenda. So our next item is, our fifth item is review and action of a resolution related to strategic property planning. You will see from the document materials that the resolution has two parts. The charge to President Gable to create a strategic property planning work group and the establishment of an East Cliff Property Task Force. I'm going to ask Senior Vice President France to speak on to the first part of the resolution that addresses the strategic property planning work group. Senior Vice President France.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hips. As we discussed at the July board retreat, the university owns over 28,000 acres across 5 campuses, research and outreach centers, and a variety of other properties across the state. In alignment with Commitment 5 of Impact 2025 System-Wide Strategic Plan, last year the board codified guiding principles for the acquisition and disposition of property. I can tell you from our point of view, we appreciate that debate, that discussion, and the revised principles. With those guiding principles in place, now we believe is the perfect time for the creation of this work group. If established, the work group would formalize efforts already underway to review the university's property portfolio and determine how to maximize the use of our property to meet the university's mission. For property currently owned by the university, the work group will determine if we should retain or dispose of those properties and then come to the board. On the acquisition side, the work group would identify those types of properties we want to acquire in the future to align our campus plans and other priorities. As our work group advances with this initiative, we will bring to the board updates and if required, recommendations for your review and action. A first-year summary of the work group's progress would be provided to the committee in June and become part of the annual strategic facilities and real estate report on an ongoing basis. Thank you, Vice Chair Hips.
Thank you, Senior Vice President France. The second part of the resolution creates an East Cliff Property Task Force. East Cliff, as the presidential residence, is overseen directly by the Board of Regents, and because of that difference, a review of East Cliff cannot include or report to the current president of the university and must be separated from the work Senior Vice President France just described. As we review the rest of the university's property, this is an ideal time for us as a board to also review East Cliff. The task force, like the work group, will apply the board's guiding principles for the acquisition and disposition of property in considering a recommendation for East Cliff. The task force could return any number of recommendations for our consideration, from maintaining East Cliff as the presidential residence, repurposing East Cliff for other university uses, or disposition of the property. Any and all possibilities will be considered by the task force. The task force will be chaired by Regent Davenport, our current chair of the East Cliff Advisory Board. The other members being administrative expertise and the ability to pull in other university staff that work to support, maintain, and have extensive knowledge of East Cliff. The task force will also engage with the two groups charged by the board with overseeing East Cliff, the East Cliff Advisory Board and the East Cliff Technical Advisory Committee. I want to make clear that the review is not focused on our current president. Rather, it is focused on using our guiding principles in alignment with the commitments of the Impact 2025 strategic plan to determine a long-term model for presidential housing within the context of the university's overall strategic property goals. Finally, I'll note that while the board chair could appoint a special committee, board leadership is seeking the board's endorsement of this task force today. And like the Presidential Search Advisory Committee, the task force will not be delegated any authority from the board, only the ability to make a recommendation to the board. As an advisory task force to the board, its meetings will not be required to be open under the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. Now, before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to recommend approval of the resolution related to strategic property planning? So moved. A motion by Farnsworth.
Second.
Second by Rocha. Okay, thank you. Let's turn to discussion. Okay. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Acting Chair Hipsch. I first thank the board leadership for bringing this back to the board for ratification approval. This makes a great deal of sense. We've had conversations about this before, and I look forward to the work of both the larger work group and then also the task force. One question: Will the makeup of the work group, does that come back to the board for ratification, or is that how will we understand who ends up on the work group itself?
That's a good question. I believe it's spelled out in the previous, I think Regent Davenport's going to chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. The task force, I understand, because that's
Okay.
listed. It's the work group that this directs to establish, and then I'm just wondering if that will come back to us for any ratification or, how that works with the board.
Sorry about that, I was confused. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hibbs, Regent Rocha. Yeah, as a charge going to the president will appoint and select the work group and begin work, and I'm sure we'll report back. I'm not sure of the requirement that it be reported back to the board, but it'll be under her direction.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Because bottom line is whatever comes to us is going to be the president's recommendation based on that. And so but I just was curious as to how that would, obviously property is a big deal and has been historically. So I'm looking forward to the work that's done. Again, my sense will be that the president will own the recommendations. The task force obviously is spelled out here, and I think it's a very good selection of folks, and I appreciate people willing to put the time in.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay. Now, we're going to move on to our next item is review and action on 2 real estate transactions, both for the Twin Cities campus. And we will take each of them individually. I'll invite Senior Vice President France to provide an introduction, and then Assistant Vice President Leslie Kruger will take us through both items. Senior Vice President France, would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hibbs, and that's Vice President Krieger. We have 2 real estate transactions for your review and action today. We appreciate the board's support in considering review and action today. The acquisition of these parcels supports the board's vision for long-term change and development in the southeast gateway of the East Bank, which was first adopted in 2016. Specifically, these transactions add to the land we are acquiring for the future clinical campus expansion, including the proposed health discovery hub. Assistant Vice President Krieger will provide the details of the transactions as well as how they align with board policy and adopted plans. If it's permissible, Vice Chair Hibbs, will let Vice President Krieger go forward.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hibbs, members of the committee. Today I present to you for review and action the proposed purchase of 512 Ontario Street, Southeast Minneapolis. The property is located on Block 11, south of the Oak Street parking ramp and across Ontario Street from the Clinics and Surgery Center. The university has gradually been acquiring properties on this block since 2007, and this is the final property on the block that is not owned by the university at this point in time. Property on this block has been land banked for the university's clinical campus expansion, as noted by Senior Vice President Franz, and this block has been identified as the home of the university's proposed health discovery hub. The property consists of a 4,952 square foot lot improved with an owner-occupied residence. The existing residential structure is a 2.5-story single-family house built in 1903 and consists of a 2,200 gross square foot home. As you'll note on this slide, we are attempting to articulate how a specific real estate transaction aligns with the guiding principles codified by the Board of Regents in policy earlier this year. In this case, the acquisition directly aligns with 2 of the 4 principles. First, acquisitions must support the university's educational, research, or service mission, And in this case, the proposed Health Discovery Hub on the site supports all three components of the university's mission and several action items in Impact 25. Secondly, future acquisitions and dispositions should be contemplated in the campus plans. This property was identified for acquisition in the 2021 Twin Cities Campus Plan, again to support the future clinical campus expansion. The purchase price for this property is $1,884,000, which is greater than the appraised value for the property. This exceedance will be recouped through the savings in design and construction costs that are associated with having the entire block available for the development of the Health Discovery Hub, rather than building around the property. The university will use debt proceeds from state-supported debt that was refinanced in 2021. The university received permission to retain the state appropriation savings generated by the refinancing and apply the savings to support new debt for funding both the design and acquisition-related expenses for the university's Health Discovery Hub. We estimate the closing will occur on or before December 31st, 2022, and then we will ground lease the property back to the sellers for no rent in order to allow them time to find a new residence. And that concludes my presentation on 512 Ontario Street Southeast.
Thank you very much. And before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to recommend approval of the purchase of the 512 Ontario Street Southeast property?
So move.
Motion by Davenport. Is there a second? Second by Regent Johnson. Any discussion? Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious what the appraised value was.
The appraised value for the property was $1,132,000. So we are significantly higher than the appraised value.
Go ahead.
And I'm assuming that's because the seller knows of our desire for the property?
That is correct. The sellers are two sisters who grew up in the home and have lived there their entire lives and are very attached to their home. And the university has been in conversation with the homeowners for almost 20 years around the potential acquisition of this property.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Rosha.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that was just following that question is, so this is somewhat of the premium we pay not to go through an aggressive action to secure the property between the cost savings, the legal fees, et cetera. I guess it's,
That is correct.
financially fortunate to have been in that property these years, I guess, so, thank you.
The university wants to build anything in Maple Grove.
Okay. There being no further discussion. You appear ready to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are you opposed? Say no. Okay, motion passes. Okay. Assistant Vice President Krieger, please take us through the other real estate item.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hipsch, members of the committee. The second property we are recommending today is the acquisition of 639 Erie Street Southeast. This property is located on Erie Street, south of Fulton Street, on the southeastern edge of campus. The university acquired other property on this block in 2017 and in 2019. The property on this block that faces Huron Boulevard was acquired in 2017 and is intended to support the long-range transportation planning efforts associated with the intensification of development in the area. The property acquired in 2019 along South Erie Street on this block face is being used for a combination of land banking and Block 11 relocations, both of which support the university's future clinical campus expansion. This parcel is 3,500 square feet and is improved by a 1.5-story, 1,500 square foot owner-occupied residence. At the time that you acquired the next door properties in 2019, the homeowners were not yet ready to sell their property. They recently approached the U expressing an interest and desire to sell their property at this point in time. Like the previous property we reviewed today, this property also directly aligns with the first two regions' principles for the same reasons: the support of the future clinical campus expansion as articulated the 2021 Twin Cities Campus Plan. The purchase price for this property is $437,875, and the university will purchase this using university balances. And this property, this purchase price is consistent with the appraised value for the property. Closing is estimated to occur on or before December 30th, 2022. However, the purchase and sale agreement allows for the sellers to extend the closing by an additional 16 months to allow time for them to find a new residence. And with that, I conclude this presentation on the potential acquisition of 639 Erie Street Southeast.
Thank you, Vice President Krieger. Before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to recommend approval of the purchase of 639 Erie Street Southeast Minneapolis?
So moved.
Okay, the vote of motion, is there a second?
Second.
And there's a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Next, we will have the consent report. And Vice President Franz, will you summarize the items in today's consent report?
Vice Chair Hips, yes, thank you. So the consent agenda contains 9 purchases of goods and services, 1 employment agreement for the appointment of Forrest Carr as the new athletic director at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and 1 capital budget amendment for the conversion of a robotics lab in Smith Hall into suitable research space for the chemistry department. Among the purchases that are presented, I'd like to bring 3 to your attention. The first purchase I'd like to review with you is a contract with Huron Consulting Group. This is to continue to assist the university with the PEAK initiative. There have been 2 prior contracts with Huron to support PEAK. One was for the analysis and assessment work, and a second one was for service redesign and implementation planning work recently completed. The total investment in those 2 prior contracts was just a little over $3 million. From the 2 prior contracts, Huron has delivered a comprehensive list of recommendations for service delivery, improvement, redesigned service delivery models, and an implementation plan. The university is now poised to begin implementation and seeks to continue PEAK's momentum by engaging Huron for implementation services. This proposed new contract deliverables include fully implementing Phase 1 and beginning implementation activities for Phase 2. So let me explain Phase 1. Phase 1 is a relatively small and specifically designed group to ensure implementation is successful. It also gives us time to begin the process of creating the new central service organizations that will support the new shared services for all 4 phases. In Phase 1, they include Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses, and the Twin Cities units of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, the Law School, the Office of the Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations, University Finance, Board of Regents, Internal Audit, Office of Information Technology, and Office of Human Resources. Phase 2 implementation starts in July 2023 and will significantly scale up the number and the size of the units in Phase 2. Phase 2 will include at least 1 and possibly up to 3 large academic units where we anticipate an increase in an additional efficiency and savings. Now, the contract amount recommended for Huron in this 3rd contract is $3.55 million in professional fees, plus out-of-pocket expenses not to exceed $400,000 with approval by the university for these expenses. This contract would begin on September 19, next week, and extend through the Phase 1 ending on June 30, 2023. Now, according to early estimates prepared by Huron, we anticipate additional capacity created from Phase 1 will be in the range of $3 to $5 million per year, with additional capacity increasing with the implementation of each new phase. Members of the committee, PEAK has provided a roadmap for transforming the university's administrative service delivery, and we are in a position to begin implementation. Approval of the contract will allow Huron to continue supporting the university as we begin implementation, and we recommend approval of the contract. While I'm on the topic of PEAK, I would like to update you on the Impact 2025 goal to institute improvement practices to promote efficiency in all aspects of operations. This is really our continuous improvement effort, and this is a fundamental component of PEAK, As we enter into the implementation phase of PEAK, our focus and outcomes will be on improving the efficiency and effectiveness of key operations. We set the baseline this summer with Huron's analysis and assessment. The Impact 2025 metric calls for annual reporting on continuous improvement practices system-wide. Our June or July PEAK update to the Board of Regents this next year will serve as an annual report as we move through phases 1 that I just described. The second purchase that I would like to mention is with Sasaki Associates. We previously contracted with Sasaki, a firm specializing in integrated planning, to complete work on the Twin Cities campus plan. As we shared with you last spring, our intent is to have integrated campus and climate action plans, as well as facility condition and energy and utility plans for all of our campuses as part of our Impact 2025 work. This contract is for campus and climate action planning for our 4 campuses, Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester. Now, while the initial phase of work at the Duluth campus will be for $500,000, the contract is structured in a way that gives the administration the ability to continue with Sasaki to complete work on the remaining campuses, subject to ongoing assessment of satisfactory performance on a campus-by-campus basis. This item seeks approval for up to $1.5 million to conduct campus and climate action planning at Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester. The total potential value of the $1.5 million meets the threshold for your approval. And finally, I want to mention the purchase of athletics for a new LED video board equipment for the Huntington Banks Stadium scoreboard. You may also have seen this mentioned last week in the Star Tribune. The existing equipment was installed before the facility opened in 2009 and has a typical life expectancy of 10 years. Replacement, we believe, is prudent and necessary for maintaining a high-quality game day experience. Gopher Athletics is accomplishing the replacement through several purchases spread over time, and this purchase represents the second purchase towards this replacement project. And with that, those are the contracts I wanted to highlight for the committee to consider.
Thank you, Vice President France. Okay, is there anyone that would like to ask a question, make a comment, or separate an item out from the report to be voted on separately before I invite a motion to recommend approval of the consent report? Okay, Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hipsch. And just 2 quick questions for Senior Vice President Franz. And you kind of addressed actually some of it just now in highlighting those 3. Question about PEAK and then question about the scoreboard. So in the docket item for PEAK, it says funding will be provided from amounts approved in the FY23 budget for PEAK. So just to clarify, it helped to understand the phases, which I've heard before, but it always helps to hear it again. So this is basically just releasing, out of the pool that was already approved in the FY23 budget, this amount for the completion of the initiative after those phases. Is that a correct understanding?
Vice Chair Hipps, Regent Farnsworth, yes, it is.
Okay, awesome, thank you. 2, about the scoreboard. So yeah, I did hear about it. I think maybe, I don't know what the timing was of the stories in the media compared to the docket items being released, but I think I heard about it in the media first and was just wondering, it says here that the purchase will be funded with a combination of philanthropy, sponsorships, and university commercial paper. Do we have, I'm assuming, or maybe I shouldn't assume, that's why I'm asking the question, that we have the philanthropy and sponsorships and kind of everything lined up, and that's why we're doing review and action by way of consent today. Just that's really my question on it.
Vice President France.
Vice Chair Hipps, Regent Farnsworth. We're in that process. So one of the things we're doing now is to get this purchase lined up and in order, and we have begun the work toward the philanthropy. There's obviously an opportunity for Farnsworth Enterprises if you're interested. And we'd be happy to talk to you after the meeting. But all kidding aside, that's what the team is ready to do, because it presents, as you can imagine, some really choice opportunities for people to for philanthropy. So we're working on that as we speak.
As Regent Kenyanya has said earlier about our financial disclosures, mine is shorter than a Post-it note. So Thank you, though. So, I guess I saw this and I, kind of, I'm not separating any, requesting to separate anything today, but I understand that some people have reached out about this and I understand where we're going. And so, I understand what some concerns are from the broader university community, but I appreciate your explanation and answering my clarifying questions.
Yeah, thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Acting Chair Hipsch. Regent Farnsworth touched on both topics that I saw. I'll take them in reverse order. So, on the video board topic, I guess I hadn't noticed anything wrong with the current video board. I've been attending these season ticket holder since 1986, and even through all the lean years, right? Now we get to enjoy some good years here. But I'm a little bit concerned for a couple reasons. One is the dynamic of some changes within the department, and another is the fact that, in the post-COVID, I could have seen, because we're still recovering from some of the debt that we had to take on as a department because of COVID and the lost revenue, that maybe this could have, gets pushed out a season or two. And so to me, it feels like it's a little bit, it's a little aggressive from a financial standpoint. And I likewise heard some of the concerns that Regent Farnsworth talked about. And so from my perspective, I would much, I understand that we're working toward identifying the sources of whether it's philanthropy, sponsorship, et cetera. I'd like to know where that is. I'd be before spending, because this is, I think we just heard almost 2% of a tuition increase on the Twin Cities campus, and so it's real money. And so I'm open to the continued process of having a world-class experience with our with intercollegiate athletics, particularly the ones that generate most of the revenue. But in the absence of knowing exactly where, or at least having a much better idea, because to just simply say, oh, we're going to do it by philanthropy, we're going to do it by sponsorships, that doesn't give me a great deal of comfort knowing exactly where that's coming from, because once the darn thing's ordered, we're paying for it. And whether we've got to go into our reserves or otherwise to cover it because we haven't caught up on those things, that doesn't feel like strong fiscal stewardship from my perspective. So I'm concerned about that. But back on the peak initiative and with Huron, I guess a couple of questions. You kind of answered one of them, at least on an annual or on a single year basis. How much have we paid to Huron total, and then how much are we expecting to yield in savings through peak throughout the process?
Vice Chair Hipsch, and we do have someone from athletics to talk more about the details if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
With regard to the peak contract, so we've paid a little over $3 million to date for services for the peak initiative. So as we work through that, the next phase through June of '23 would be a little over $3 million again. Now, the implementation phase obviously requires upfront costs to set up the service arrangements that you're going to have going forward. So some of these savings will start occurring down the road. We estimate, though, or Huron actually estimates, that even with the phase one, which is a limited group of units and campuses, that would generate in the area of $3 to $5 million per year in additional capacity and potential savings there. Going forward, the range we feel pretty comfortable with is in the $30 to $50 million per year once all four phases have been fully implemented. Now, that's going to take time to get to all that, but especially after phase two, for example, which will really be the next fiscal year, essentially. After phase two, with some larger academic units involved, that's when we're going to really start to see the initial investment of setting up these structures start paying off in terms of additional capacity and savings.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, if somebody from athletics could provide more specificity on where things are at and how that would be done, I'd be very appreciative.
Okay, we have Senior Athletic Director, Associate Athletic Director Tim McCleary. Hi.
Thank you. Regent Farnsworth and Vice Chair Regent Hipsch. Yeah. Okay, so I think the questions were about the timing and the financing. So first of all, from a timing standpoint, as Vice President Franz noted, that The average life is 10 years. We will have gone through 14 years. As we've worked through the process, it's about a 1-year lead time at least in order to secure a board. So with that, we're also at a point where the parts and the service are out of maintenance and out of production. So it really puts us at risk to have a video board failure, which is kind of a very critical component of our game day experience. So in terms of financing, currently at this point, we have been planning to build it into our operating budget, the debt service. So the board would be installed next year. The annual repayment would not begin until FY25. So we will certainly seek to reduce the debt through philanthropy and sponsorships, but at this point, we are prepared to build it into our budget starting in FY25.
Thank you. Further question?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm just really, I mean, it just seems to me that, and I thank you very much for the response, and so we don't have anything specifically identified. It's something that we would plan to try to work toward. It just seems that with all that we've been through over the last couple of years with the elimination of sports and with the economic challenges of our response to the pandemic, I'm just concerned about the optics of it at a minimum. I appreciate the risk. I was in 2009 there when we saw I was actually at home on leave from Iraq, and it was nice to see bright colors for a change. And so I appreciate that we're now almost 1.5 times the life expectancy of it, and that there's that level of risk. I just would like to have more information about where the funds are coming from to cover the cost. And so I would ask that we would have a roll call vote, Mr. Chair.
Let's go Vice President Franz and then Regent Sviggum.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hips and Regent Roche. I think part of what we want to do is to make sure that we stay committed to the excellent nature of the Big Ten program, football program that we're a part of. And I think one of the concerns that we have is not being able to maintain that level of support that, and the game time experience and the television experience is really important, not just in terms of the game day experience, but important to the athletic department in general. So we certainly support their drive for planning for this in advance, and we think that it makes the most sense at this time to start planning for that. But that's all I have at this time.
Regent Sviggum.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just 2 comments, just real quickly, on 2 different issues. The first about peak, and then I'll come back to the issue on right now. It just seems to me that, I'm concerned also about hiring outside consultants' costs, but obviously this is something you can't do inside. You can't get, if you're using the same people, you're going to get the same results. So you got to do something outside. And if the numbers are even close, Myron, to what you said, 30 or to 50 million of a ongoing yearly basis for 6 million of a one-time consulting fee. Now, those are the numbers that I came up with from what you said. That's fairly significant return. Even if it's half of the 30 or 50 million, it's still a fairly significant return. Going to the question now of the scoreboard, though, is it possible, we're going to have a few additional revenues coming into the university now because of the new Big Ten TV contract? Some significant, would we be using some of those monies for the potential of the new scoreboard?
Regent Sviggum, any increases in our revenue are certainly factored into our overall operating projections, so yes.
Okay, so I just think there is a source there with that new revenue coming in. That source that over and above what we're getting right now to pay for this enhanced experience.
Yeah, Regent Sviggum, yes, that's the case.
Well, I don't think anybody really wants to spend $5.5 million on a scoreboard. I don't think that's what we want to do, but the optics of having a depreciated out scoreboard go down in the middle of a game aren't good either. you know, especially when we're selling advertising on there and we're trying to sell a fan experience and trying to be part of something bigger than just the University of Minnesota. It's part of the Big 20 probably. So, you know, I don't like spending this kind of money, and I was at Sticker Shock too, but I don't know what billboards cost or scoreboards cost. So I'm for this, and I'm going to vote for it for that reason, so.
Vice Chair Hips, I'd just like to make one friendly amendment to Regent Swigham's comments in the sense of the overall commitment. We will have additional commitment dollars over the next 3 to 4 years, 2 to 3 years, I mean, as we go through these different phases for the PEAK initiative. I will tell you, and Vice President Horstman has been my partner in this throughout this process, and we are really on the side of using more university resources than most universities do in implementing this kind of a contract. But Regent Swigham, you're correct. We cannot do it all ourselves. We need the expertise and the support from Huron, but we have supplemented that incredibly a lot through the university personnel and Vice President Horstman's team and my team. There are a lot of people out there who have been working really hard. So it's that combination, but we think it's the right kind of combination with university commitment with those outside dollars as we need them. I just wanted to be clear about that.
That'd be fine.
Thank you.
Just one more comment.
Okay, go ahead.
When Mr. Abraham scores that game-winning touchdown against Wisconsin this fall, and our scoreboard doesn't go down, I don't want to be there. I want to be there with the scoreboard working when Abraham scores it.
I want to see that too.
What's that? I meant Iowa, I meant Iowa, Madam President.
Okay.
I forgot we got the axe here last year, right?
Yeah. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Associate Director, for hopping in on a moment's notice. My question was about the current board. If I'm understanding correctly, those boards are a bit modular and can kind of be reconfigured. Seeing as it's still working, is there a residual value in that? Can that be reconfigured at another venue, or does that go back to the vendor? Because it's the same vendor, it's Daktronics again, for a trade-in value or something like that, just seeing as it's still working.
Yeah, Regent Kenyanya, I'll answer that the best that I can. I know that that's been done in the past here. That's not something that has been brought up as an option either by the consultant that we worked with that's, works with universities and professional franchises nationally, or Daktronics. So I believe we are past the useful life and past the production and support, so.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote. Regent Rocha, did we persuade you, or do you want to do roll call vote?
I would prefer to remain with the roll call vote. Thank you.
Okay.
I think everybody makes strong arguments. I just would, as I've stated before, I would just like more clarity on the financial component of it. That's the.
Yep, that's fine. That's
Although
your
I would say, to Regent Swigham, I would just say that as he crosses the goal line to win the Big Ten title later this season, if there's an abacus up there, I would be perfectly happy. So.
Okay, so you're not going to separate it out, but are you separating?
Just roll call on the consent agenda.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Kenyanya, is there a second?
Second.
A second by one of you guys over there, so. Okay, let's do a roll call vote. Would you call the roll, please?
On the motion to recommend approval of the consent report, Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Farnsworth.
Yes.
Regent Farnsworth votes yes. Regent Ruth Johnson.
Yes.
Regent Ruth Johnson votes yes. Regent Tad Johnson.
Yes.
Regent Tad Johnson votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Powell is absent. Regent Rocha.
Abstain.
Regent Rocha abstains. Regent Swigham.
Yes.
Regent Swigham votes yes. Regent Talurabe is absent. Regent Verhalen.
Yes.
Regent Verhalen votes yes. Chair Mayron is absent. Vice Chair Hipsch.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hipsch votes yes.
Okay, the motion passes on an 8-0 and 1 abstention, so thank you. Okay, now we are going to bring up information items from Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hips and members of the committee. In today's information items, we have two reports for your review. The first item is the Central Reserve's general contingency allocations. We do not have any transactions to report this month. Now, the second one, we provide you with the annual capital financing and debt management report. This report, this is the first report since the university's sale of the $500 million in interest-only bonds in April. Now, the financial information in the first two-thirds of the report fully incorporates the $500 million that was issued. However, the ratios that are listed in pages 14 through 19 are based on Moody's comparative data only through fiscal 21, and they do not reflect the additional $500 million in debt. We just wanted to make sure that if you were reading through there, you didn't get thrown by those differences. With respect to the Board of Regents policy changes adopted, there's been no other activity to report, and so we believe that the bonds, the 2023 annual report will be the first one to include reportable activity in that bond portfolio. And I have no other information available for questions.
Are there any questions on the report? Okay, if not, you can get with Senior Vice President Franz later and ask questions too, so. Okay, so now we're gonna move into a resolution to conduct a non-public meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee pursuant to Minnesota statutes, section 13D.05, subdivision 3C3. Wow, that's a mouthful. So, we're gonna have to clear the room, I guess. We will now take up
Just jump to this.
Okay, the specific grounds here to develop or consider offers for the sale of real property. The address of the property is included in the resolution. The closed portion of this meeting will be audio recorded and will be made available to the public upon request after all property discussed at the meeting has been sold or the university has abandoned the sale. I will ask Mr. Langworthy to read the resolution in our docket and then seek a motion second. I'll note that Regent Verhalen is recusing herself from this discussion. Mr. Langworthy, please proceed.
Resolution to conduct non-public meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee to develop or consider offers for the purchase or sale of real property. Whereas, based on advice of the General Counsel, the Board of Regents has balanced the purposes served by the open meeting law and determined that there is a need to review confidential or protected non-public real estate data involving the University of Minnesota. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in accordance with Minnesota Statute 13D.01 Subdivision 3 and 13D.05 Subdivision 3C, a non-public meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee be held on Thursday, September 8th, 2022, in the boardroom, 600 McNamara Alumni Center, for the purpose of developing or considering offers or counteroffers for the sale of the following real property: approximately 280 acres at Umore Park for light industrial development bounded by Audrey Avenue to the west, Blaine Avenue to the east, and County Road 42 to the north.
Thank you, Mr. Langworthy. Is there a motion to approve the resolution? So moved. Second.
Second.
Second, motion second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The resolution is approved. We will take a short recess to provide the audience time to leave the room and end the livestock broadcast. So thank you.